I would like to welcome everybody to this IAHR Women Scholars Network second webinar entitled Senior Women Scholars of Religion Reflect on Their Academic Journeys. And it's, as it said already, a second webinar. We are looking forward to the series of webinars, and as my colleague Amy will tell you maybe later, we plan third webinar already for the end of November. But now it's a pleasure to have this, I would say, enlightening and amazing women scholars today with us who are ready to share with us their wisdom. So I'm very happy to introduce you with our discussants today, Rosalind Hackett from University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And here is, my short introduction about Rosalind. She's an anthropologist. Since 2019, she is Chancellor's Professor at University of Tennessee, Knoxville, United States. In 2005 to 2015, she served as president of the International Associations for the History of Religions and was elected an honorary life member in 2015. Actually, Rosalind also was founder of the Women Scholars Network within IAHR, and we all are very grateful for this initiative, which I believe is already have a tradition and will continue gathering women scholars working in the study of religions field. Rosalind also was a founding member of the African Association for the Study of Religions in 1992. In 2014, she became vice president of the International Council on Philosophy and Human Sciences, SIPSH, associated with UNESCO. And the most recent works that Rosalind published was the Anthropology of Global Pentecostalism and Evangelicalism, the collection of papers of scholars working in this field, and also new media and religious transformations in Africa, another collection of works, which the book which was edited by Rosalind and her colleagues. Our second participant in this discussion is Eileen Barker. She is currently a professor emeritus of sociology with special reference to the study of religion within London School of Economics and Political Science. Eileen is also founder of the information network focused on religious movements, Inform. And in 2000, she became an officer of the Order of the British Empire. And the American Academy of Religion has awarded her with Martin E. Marty Award for contributions to the public understanding of religion. The latest work by Eileen published was the book entitled Revisionism and Diversification in New Religious Movements. And Catherine Wessinger, our also discussant today, she is a professor holding the chair of Reverend James Yamauchi, professor of the history of religions at Loyola University, New Orleans. She is co-general editor of Nova Religio, the Journal of Alternative and Emergent Religions, and she is the editor of the Women in Religion series at New York University Press, and she is co-editor of the Women in the World's Religions and Spirituality Project, which is a part of the World Religions and Spirituality Project. And most recent works that I thought really worth to mention is the Oxford Handbook of Millennialism that Catherine has edited. Now, I would like to ask all the participants of this webinar to mute their microphones and allow only the discussants to have unmuted microphones. So I can hear that some have not muted. So please mute your microphones. We will be working in the following structure of this webinar. First of all, each of the participants will introduce herself, and I have asked them to reflect on three main points. How did they choose to become scholars of religion? What opportunities of career as women scholars of religion they had, and how their research interests are related to gender, if they are. And then we will continue after their presentation. We will continue with the questions and answer session. I also have prepared two questions. So first of all, I will use my power as the chair of this session and ask the questions first. But then I would encourage you very much to put your questions in the chat of this webinar, so that I can see them and ask our participants. So once again, I would like to ask everyone to mute microphones and just to enter their questions in the chat. I will stop sharing now the PowerPoint presentation, and so that we can see our speakers talking. So I would like to ask my colleague Amy Allocco, before we start working, would you have some ideas to share about this webinar and future work of Women Scholars Network?
Yes, so good morning from the East Coast of the United States. I'm Amy Allocco. I teach at Elon University in North Carolina. I'm a scholar of South Asian religions, an anthropologist who works in Southern India. And we're very happy that all of you from your different time zones and locations were able to join us. So thank you for gracing us with your presence. And most of all, we're especially grateful to today's discussants and presenters, and we're looking forward to hearing from each of you. So thank you so much for agreeing to share your remarks with us. I'll say only two things before we turn it over to you. One is that we would ask everyone who is a participant if they could add their name and their location, university or geographical location and email address to the chat. We would be very grateful. It's also really a pleasure for everyone to scroll through and e-meet those who we have not met in person. It's nice to see so many familiar faces. So if we could add our names and email addresses to the chat, then we'll be able to email you directly about the third webinar, which we have tentatively scheduled for November the 20th. And details about that and the program and topic to be considered and covered will be forthcoming. So welcome, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Amy. And now I would like to give the floor to Rosalind Hackett to present herself and introduce us with your ideas. How did you became a scholar of religion, and what was that career path?
Yes. Well, thank you very much, especially to the coordinators. This is definitely a plus coming out of the minus of a lot of what we're facing these days. So I could see the smiles on people's faces, and I'm very grateful for the invitation to speak today. I was actually drawn to the retrospective aspect of today's webinar because we seem to be increasingly anxious about where we are heading. So it was, it gave me some pleasure to look back for a change. But at the same time, I will admit to staring at my complicated CV over the last few days and wondering if there had been too many main roads and side roads in my career. I started trying to break down my academic journey by milestones and critical junctures, such as degrees, appointments and promotions, leadership positions, major publications, fellowships and awards. But then I realized that I thought about the phases and paradigm shifts of my career more in terms of countries and institutions and the people associated with those locations. Now, obviously, I don't have the time to go into these phases, but I would like to identify a few highlights, such as my conversion experience at the University of Leeds as an undergraduate, when the timing was very serendipitous that then Dr. Ursula King arrived as a new lecturer at the University of Leeds. And I was lucky to take her, go to a hybrid class. It was partly history of religion, sociology of religion, even a bit of theology thrown in. And I was hooked. I decided that I didn't just want to do a French major, and I switched to a French and religious studies major. Then I headed to London, the University of London, to do my master's. And there, faced with another turning point, if you like, I came under the influence of Professor David Martin, and I would say he, followed by Eileen, encouraged me to think more about the sociology of religion as a disciplinary perspective for my interest in new religious movements. So at that same time, I was also, because I was starting to work in Nigeria then, I was also, people said, well, why do you want to stay with religious studies? Why don't you go into area studies? You'd have more resources there and everything. But no, in my heart of hearts, or in my gut, wherever you locate these feelings, I just know I want to be a scholar of religion. And I've never wavered from that. I mean, Milda's listed me as an anthropologist, but I'm probably a good example of a hybrid of a historian of religion and an anthropologist of religion, probably a lot like Amy. I really, I would say, cut my teeth and gained confidence and courage by teaching and conducting research in Nigeria for 8 years in the late 70s and early 80s. This is where I really understood that I wanted to spend my time in the field rather than in archives, that I wanted to interview people. I wanted to do empirically oriented research. Now, the problem is that there I found that the history of religions, as I had been taught it, and I'd been taught by top flight scholars, it didn't suit the context where I found myself. So I learned to improvise, and I took off in a career that's, at that point in my career, focusing on religious diversity, pluralism, change, and with a predilection for minoritarian religious groups, such as new religious movements and indigenous or traditional religions. Since then, I have spent time in Europe, of course, Germany, the Netherlands. I've also spent time in Ghana, in South Africa, but I'm going to run through all of those and say that it's really, when I came to the United States in the mid 80s that I really found some stability. Not that I had a permanent position to begin with. I mean, I went through an adjunct phase where I was teaching classes at Georgetown University, George Washington, and that probably was a very precarious time while I was working on my PhD, and I was an unknown quantity on the American scene. And I do remember going to my first American Academy of Religion meeting back in the 1980s. And if it hadn't been for Ninian Smart, who found me wandering and lost, took me off to the bar and said, you know, it is possible for a Brit to make it in the US. And otherwise I might honestly have gone home. Yes, eventually I landed a position at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, and have sort of built up steadily from there. So that has provided my base, so for which I'm enormously grateful. And I know that finding that sort of secure job and supportive environment is getting more and more challenging, of course. And I would say that you mentioned that I co-founded the Women Scholars Network, but I also was starting to feel the need to be more of an activist for women, because there were very few women professors, lecturers, actually, when I arrived at the University of Tennessee, and especially in the administration, it was absolutely male dominated. So I and some other women, we started an association of women faculty, and that really provided an excellent sort of caucus, a community to connect across the university. So I don't know, if any of you find yourselves in those sorts of situations. I mean, creating a local community can be enormously helpful. I will admit that I didn't, in the earlier phases of my research and my teaching, you wouldn't have identified me actually as a feminist working on gender issues. I mean, I was incorporating women's roles in the religious movements I was studying, but I wasn't, I think it was a bit ahead of the feminist wave that particularly Kathy Wessinger has really embraced and been such a leader on. So I don't, that wasn't one of the main strings of my bow at that time. Now, I know we've only got a short amount of time, so I do want to get to just some of my recommendations based on what, I mean, obviously it's research and publication that matters and that distinguishes us, and getting to conferences and all of that. But I also thought about those areas where I feel that my career, my confidence got a real boost. And that is in terms of professional service. I mean, I have a category in my notes here which says service. We all have to take decisions at one point or another. What sort of service are we going to do to the profession or to our departments, to our units, to our university? And and sometimes there's often pressure on women, particularly in universities and departments, to do a lot of the work. And I worry about some of my women colleagues who get stuck at certain levels, particularly the associate professor, because they become associate heads or they become in charge of undergraduate studies. So fortunately, these days, at least on my campus, and I'd like to hear from others too, about whether your universities, your institutions are cognizant of that problem, where women are often more willing to serve or are called on to serve, and then that has negative effects on their academic output. So I think one has to be very careful about those administrative assignments and make sure they're equitably distributed. Now, where I've got really want to talk more positively is about how much I gained from my professional service, particularly with the IAHR. And if you're interested, I wrote a piece in one of the publications of Newman, edited by Tim Jensen and Armin Getz, where I do a retrospective on my service in the IAHR. But I do want to say that it wasn't just service. I would say that I really learned so much more about the field, about how the study of religion was conducted in different different institutions in different parts of the world, and that really I found so so inspirational and empowering. So if you, I mean, I know that several of you here are doing that, and I'm just urging that it doesn't have to be something separate from your scholarship. You can find new ways to collaborate, and I think I know that Amy is a great example of that, of the way how the sort of service that she's done, particularly with Asian women colleagues and at some of our meetings, how she has talked about how that has benefited her research. So I do want to underscore that. Now, of course, there's increasingly pressure on us as we are under threat, being scholars in the humanities and social sciences, to defend ourselves more in terms of our research and our teaching to the wider public. And I mean, the pressures are really increasing here. So again, perhaps we can have a deeper discussion about this in the future, about forms of engagement or public-facing scholarship. I mean, this has appealed to me because I do have some background in the media. I mean, I nearly followed a career in the BBC, but that was another turning point for me. I decided I didn't want to become a producer. I wanted to become an academic. So I do think that this is an important and growing phase where we have to be called upon, that we're being increasingly called upon to represent ourselves, to defend ourselves.
Rosalind,
Yes,
I would like to ask you to stop at this moment, because you started already answering my question about recommendations. Yeah, okay. So I would like, we will certainly return to this item. I would like to ask Eileen to tell us about the choice to become scholar of religion and opportunities of career as a woman scholar of religion.
I didn't choose. It chose me. It was a series of accidents, and they're all very idiosyncratic, and I don't really think they've got very much that relates to any other women, except for the fact that it all started that having children, one of whom was rather ill, prevented me continuing my original career. And then through a series of accidents, I studied sociology through a series of accidents. I was invited to be a lecturer a couple of days after the undergraduate results came out. And that was at LSE where I'd studied, and I've stayed there ever since. And I'm now a very old emeritus professor at LSE. And somehow I got involved in religion, and I am a woman. I suppose one has opportunities that pop up the whole time. And I am a very curious person. I'm very interested in why people do things and believe things that I don't believe or do. And so that was a sort of push to accept where opportunities to satisfy my curiosity came up. Also, I'm interested in epistemology in the sense that I am fascinated by why people believe they know the things that they do know when they think that they're not just a worldview that they've chosen, but that can be empirically shown to be true. And I started off actually doing science and religion and looking at how scientists would prove empirically as scientists that the Bible was true, or would prove empirically as scientists that the Bible was not true, or prove that parasite ecology, synthesis, and all sorts of things that people think are pseudoscience were true. And when you move into the field of new religious movements, which I drifted into, again by mistake, there are so many things that people believe are obviously true. And so I suppose that curiosity has been what has allowed me to take up certain paths that opened up to me, why I went down them and off the path I thought I was going along. So that's really why I became a sociologist of religion. I started by being invited to a Unification Mooney conference to talk about science and religion, which I'd been studying. Then I got interested in the Moonies, as they were called, and the more I studied about them, the more I got interested in the anti-cult movement, which started attacking me. And I got interested in the media and how society reacted to new religious movements, or cults as they were called. And more recently, I've been particularly interested in the anti-cult movement. For the last 20 years, I've been going to their annual conference. I now have made friends of people who I thought were devils with horns and forked tails, who thought of me as a devil with horns and forked tails. Actually, some of them still have got horns and forked tails. I've spent 10 years going for 2 weeks to the police in China, in Beijing, and which became more and more interesting as President Xi took over, and the attitudes towards the Communist Party, towards the Xizhao, the evil cults or heterodox sects. So this again is all curiosity and trying to understand people better. That answering your first question, Milda?
Thank you.
Now?
Yes, maybe we will continue surely later. Now I would like to give the floor to Kathy Wessinger from New Orleans.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I'll jump right into it. I'll try to keep it to maybe 5.5 minutes, if that's okay. So from 1970 through 1974, I was an undergraduate at University of South Carolina in my hometown of Columbia, South Carolina, and I was a fine arts major. And I took a course on Hinduism, and it sparked my interest in the study of the religions of the world. And by the time I graduated, I had a minor in religious studies. In 1973, I had the opportunity to travel to India on a student trip led by the professor who had taught the course on Hinduism, Dr. Hal French. And that trip to India was totally amazing for me. And I had never left the country before. I'd never traveled outside the United States. So it was an amazing experience for me. After I returned, I started thinking about how I could get back to India. After graduating and working in offices for a couple of years, I decided to attend graduate school and earn a PhD in religious studies with a specialization in the religions of India. In 1976, I began studies in the graduate program in the School of Religion at University of Iowa in Iowa City, Iowa. I was part of the first sizable group of women students to enter that graduate program, and all of the professors were men. When I expressed my interest in studying about women in religions, I was discouraged from doing so. And I was also told that if I left Iowa City and got married and had a baby before I completed my dissertation, I was not a serious scholar. However, that's exactly what I did. After completing coursework and passing qualifier exams, including one in the history of Christianity, I left Iowa City to move to New Orleans with my boyfriend. After taking and passing comprehensive exams, I traveled to India to do research on the life and thought of Annie Besant, the second president of the Theosophical Society, with international headquarters outside Chennai, then called Madras. After I returned, I got married, I became pregnant, and worked full-time during the pregnancy. I started writing the dissertation after my son was born in 1982. I defended the dissertation in 1985. After completing my degree, I immediately began reading publications by feminist scholars on women in religions while working full-time. In spring 1986, I taught a course on society, women, and religion, which I had developed and proposed to the sociology department at Tulane University. While teaching part-time at Tulane, I also started teaching part-time at Loyola University, New Orleans, where I taught sections of the required Intro to World Religions course. Beginning in 1987, I was hired as full-time adjunct assistant professor at Loyola University, New Orleans. I joined with women faculty members in other departments to form an interdisciplinary women's studies minor. During this time, I developed and taught my course, my Women in World Religions course, and I also taught, and I still teach, Women in Christianity, which had been previously taught by Sister Farah Empestado. As part of my studies for the two Women in Religions courses, I edited and published 2 books on women's religious leadership in America. About that time, our New Religions Studies colleague, Gordon Melton, made a comment to me that prompted me to realize at last that I was motivated to study about women religious leaders in particular, because there had been no models in my cultural background for women who speak up and are active outside the home. In 1993, I was in the process of writing a textbook on women in religions and cultures when the Branch Davidians went up in flames, and my research and publication trajectory shifted to millennialism studies, which was another topic I had studied when I was researching Annie Besant's intellectual history. In 2011, I wrote a proposal for a Women in Religions book series and invited authors to write short textbooks of approximately 60,000 words each. I signed the contract for the series with New York University Press. In 2015, 3 of the books were published in the series: Women in New Religions by Laura Vance, Women in Christian Traditions by Rebecca Moore, Women in Japanese Religions by Barbara Ambrose. This coming December, 2 more books will be published in the series: Women in Buddhist Traditions by Karma Lakshay Somo. My book will be out in December, Theory of Women in Religions. And authors in this series are making good progress on other books. Oriaranke Oladipo, and I apologize for mispronouncing her name. We correspond a lot, and I'm sorry I couldn't meet her face to face in this session. Her book, her manuscript, Women in Yoruba Religions, in my opinion, is virtually complete, and I've assigned chapters to my students of Women in World Religions, and they really enjoy learning about women in Yoruba religions. Elizabeth Goldstein is making good progress writing Women in Jewish Traditions, and I have there are three other forthcoming manuscripts. Women in Muslim Traditions by Keisha Ali, Women in Chinese Religions by Vivian Lee Nyaitre, and Women in Hindu Religions by Neelima Shukla Block. And lastly, in 2015, Rebecca Moore and I began co-editing the Women in World Religions and Spirituality project, which Milda mentioned earlier. And there's an announcement for that project on the Facebook page for this organization. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Catherine. You probably, those of you who were maybe late to join this webinar, you were also expecting the fourth participant, Oyeronke Olademo, to be here today with us. However, she sends her apologies and she could not join us. And Rosalind has explained us that there is a very difficult situation nowadays in Nigeria, and this is probably the reason why Oyeronke was not able to join us. So we will continue with these free participants, free discussants who have already presented themselves. And my question would be for all of you about about your career and what would you do differently if you start nowadays. Of course, you are coming from different contexts. We have here as our participants people from different parts of the world with very different stories of women in those societies, and your experience, having in mind the second feminism wave, I think is very interesting, and hopefully will be something what is worth to discuss in other social contexts as well. So I would like to ask you now, if you look retrospectively, what would you have been doing differently, and what would be your recommendations for the future women scholars of religions? Rosalind, maybe we will start with you. Mm-hmm. Could you please unmute yourself?
Thank you. So let me pick up on what I was saying about self-representation and critical self-awareness. I think that I had none of that when I started out, and now I'm sure if I was starting out, I mean, I would have no choice in the matter, that I would have to think and articulate very clearly how the path that I would be taking, where it would fit in terms of the field more generally, or subfields, or I use this word fit because it comes up so frequently in conversations in my department when we're either hiring lecturers, instructors, or colleagues, that the emphasis is not just what are you an expert in, but how do you fit the field, how do you fit the department, how do you so there's so much more pressure on us to be able to represent ourselves to future employers, to funding agencies, perhaps to the media, on our websites. I just did not have that pressure. I just basically got on with it and sort of almost followed my nose and my passion. And I was driven in part by the need, where I saw a need, where I thought that areas that were under researched, because I was looking for a scoop. I mentioned that I had spent some time in the BBC as a student, and there I'd been trained to think more as a journalist, like to find areas that needed doing. So the pressure on us to self-represent is extreme, and I don't know whether you feel it in the different parts of the world that you are. And most of us are just underprepared in terms of how to do that and how to justify our research, our disciplinary perspectives, and that becomes even harder in a way, because our field overall is so much more interdisciplinary, right? I've gone through different disciplinary phases. Now I'm working in sound studies and religious studies. So I've had periods of working on art and art history and anthropology and media studies. So, it becomes challenging to represent and justify your different trajectories. So I'm interested in whether others feel that pressure too, that, if you can't represent it, if you can't connect yourself to conversations and communities, then you're not going to either survive or thrive.
Thank you. Thank you, Rosalind. Kathy, would you like to join
Sure.
our discussion now?
Yes, and I always tell someone who's considering going to graduate school, a young woman student, I always say, look for a graduate. For years, I've said, look for a graduate department in which there are women professors. But the other thing that I note is that the men who are professors now have changed, because many of them are feminists, okay? So definitely find a graduate department where you have women professors and you also have feminist male professors. And the other thing that I recommend that someone do is to travel, identify the departments you're interested in, where you're interested in studying, the faculty members that you're interested in studying with. And even if money is scarce, for instance, I didn't have money to go and travel around to different graduate departments, but I do think it's important to make a trip or two ahead of time, meet the professors you're considering studying with, and get to know them, let them get to know you, and make sure that, and be assured that they will mentor you. Okay, so that's another recommendation. And my last recommendation is, once you are a graduate student and you've made progress in your graduate studies, I think it's really nice when graduate students start attending professional meetings. And then you get there and you meet scholars who share your interests and who can also encourage you. And for me, that was a turning point, because actually when I was a graduate student, I was not encouraged to go to professional meetings. I was told the American Academy of Religion was a scary place, essentially, okay? So as soon as I completed my PhD and I went to the American Academy of Religion, and immediately I connected with a new religious movements group and met a community of very good scholars, friends. I would say mentors, but they never took a mentoring attitude. They always took a friendship attitude, including Eileen, and also, and the other thing I did is start attending for a while the Society for the Scientific Study of Religion, where I met the sociologists who were studying new religious movements. So somehow it doesn't seem accidental to me that a number of us here are also involved in new religious movements, because that's been an area that's been a very open-minded scholars who are supportive of each other. But at any rate, I enjoy meeting graduate students when they come to professional meetings, and I appreciate my colleagues who encourage their graduate students to attend professional meetings. So those are my recommendations.
Thank you, Catherine. I would like to ask now Eileen, from your story, it seems that you can wonder maybe there are some differences between United States and United Kingdom in this reflection of women being scholar in the academia. I wonder maybe you felt differently because you are in UK, or was it something else? Why you think gender did not matter in your case, or there is some different explanation behind that? And what would be your recommendations for the future scholars of religion?
Well, to answer the first question that you asked originally, what would you do different? I can't really think of anything I'd do different in the big scale. I mean, there are some great faux pas I've made, but I'm not going to confess to those now. But there aren't paths that I would have taken I think are different. As to being a woman, in some ways, I mean, it's a very long time ago. I was going to say it's a long time ago I was a woman. It's a very long time ago I was a young woman. I had to retire in 2003, so I haven't been in the university, but I'm still emeritus and pop in the whole time and travel around giving talks and things. And I back Kathy's thing about saying going to meetings. They really are incredibly important. And although this is all very nice, it's nothing to having a cup of tea or a drink in the bar or something with people who are studying the same or slightly different. Women. Yeah, I think there are certain advantages to being a woman as well as disadvantages. When I became a professor at LSE, there were 100 professors and 5 women. And Ros talked about this a bit, but the director was very convinced that he was a feminist. So women ought to be represented on all committees. So the 5 of us were stretched out and had to do all these committees. So we were usually expected to pour the tea and not take notes, actually, because they had administrators. But we were overwhelmed by committees in the name of allowing women to have a say. Sometimes it was a bit difficult to have a say because they did think you were just there to pour the tea. But generally speaking, they were useful because you did get, although LSE is only social sciences, it did open me up to history, economics, anthropology, psychology, and even maths and some of the other subjects. And I got to have friends and learned quite a bit through that. As far as research goes, I think being a woman is very obvious, very often an advantage. For one thing, we don't provide the threat that sometimes men do, particularly the alpha male who is saying, you know, I'm going to come and tell you what we believe in do. We tend to be a bit more, or at least we can play the game of being a bit more sort of subservient. We're probably better listeners. And I think listening that's the one thing I always told my students, tell anybody when they ask me advice, listen. It's very important, I think, and watch. And the other thing that I would say, and this has nothing to do with being a woman, but I think women are better at it. We're better at the verstehen bit of thinking what, if we were in a particular situation and we had the assumptions that somebody else has, how we might feel and see things the way they do see it. But at the same time, we've got to be scientific in the sense that we should have control groups if we're going to make generalizations. A whole lot of, well, I'm not going to go into a methodology course, but there are certain mistakes that we don't make if we're good social scientists. My presidential lecture when I was for the SSR was, that's the Society for the Scientific Study of Religion, was the scientific study of religion, ? You must be joking, ! And that actually is, I think, far more my advice to people than I realized at the time. We have to be as scientific as we can be, and we have to realize that people don't behave like atoms or carbon, and that meaning and understanding is very, very important. So balancing those two sides, the statistics, mathematics, logic, understanding logical fallacies. It's amazing how many logical fallacies you can find among some of our colleagues in their writings. Being as precise as possible to get rid of what we can't know is wrong, as much as finding out what is in fact the case. And I think women also have access. A colleague of mine did her PhD on ISKCON, the Hare Krishna movement, and she actually converted, and she thought she would get a far deeper understanding that way. And in some ways she did, but she wasn't allowed anywhere near the men. And I was around the same time studying ISKCON, and I was able to talk to the leaders and everyone because I hadn't converted and I was an outsider. And I was able to talk to the women. There was one occasion when I had a sort of focus group with just women in the Philadelphia temple, and they came out with all sorts of things that they'd never said to each other before. So, complaining about the sort of male chauvinism that was going on in ISKCON in that particular temple. I wasn't very popular at the temple after that, but I do think we have got access and we can use that. And sometimes it helps. Men are more likely to want to help us sometimes, to almost flirt with us. It isn't quite flirting, but it's a sort of, I'll help you, the little woman. And I see no reason why we shouldn't take advantage of that, even if we want to keep them sometimes, because they're being so patronizing. But there are certain things that I think it is helpful to be a woman. It isn't always a disadvantage. So sisters, don't be worried because you're a woman. Be grateful.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Eileen, for this inspiring talk. Now we have some questions. So I would like now I will read the question, and if you want to answer, just give me a sign and please go on. So Anna from Ukraine is asking, how did or still do our speakers manage the double burden of being a woman scholar and having family responsibilities? Of course, I understand the situations are very different in each case, but maybe there are some general advice. How to reconcile?
I'll try to address that. It's very challenging, and other challenges come up along the way, you know, perhaps in your marriage, for instance. But but at any rate, it's always a balancing act. It does help after your children grow up. That's been my experience. But even then, you know, of course you want to be in touch with your adult children. So it remains a balancing act, and so I think we each have to find our own way because every family is different.
Thank you. I don't see Rosalind and Eileen.
Okay.
Rosalind, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I had a couple of children before I started academic life. I didn't go to university till I was 29. So I was 32 when I got my BSc. So they still went to bed early at that point. I had an au pair girl, which was helpful, and my husband was very helpful. He worked at the BBC, so he had clear hours, and we were able to work out things. And it was helpful in that I could come home, put them to bed, and then work in the evenings. As they grew older, it became more difficult because they wanted to stay up. But then I really am quite lucky in the husband I had. You can't see me, I don't think, I'm not going to. But choosing the right husband is a great help, which of course most people don't. Some people have husbands that are worse and more nuisance, and some people have to manage by themselves. So, as Kathy says, you can't generalize. I used to take them to my lectures sometimes. They'd sit at the back with crayons. At one point, one of my daughters came back and told her father that I'd been discussing the situation in Egypt, which surprised me because I was talking about Durkheim. And then I realized later this was suicide.
So Rosalind,
Yeah, just a quick general reflection on this. Certainly, if I consider my own university, the University of Tennessee, I mean, there've been, in the 30 plus years I've been here, I mean, it's like the difference between night and day in terms of greater numbers of women faculty, leaders, administrators, and also just being much more supportive and attentive to the needs of women. And so, you know, up to the pandemic, we can say that you know, I and many other women felt very good about how there were structures in place and initiatives and mentoring networks to make sure that women's needs were accommodated, they didn't fall behind. But unfortunately, with the pandemic, and you've probably seen the analyses on the surveys and everything, the pandemic and the shutdowns have set women back professionally more than men. And even some forecasts say that women may not recover for years in terms of, because they're often the ones doing the homeschooling and looking after families. So this is extremely unfortunate. The gains that have been made more generally for women in academia are being eroded. But I would say, though, that I mean, our various professional associations that are working on this and helping draw attention to it and to see how this can be countered or you know, adjustments can be made. But I mean, you know, so it's like the questions that you asked us, Milda, I was thinking about how, you know, answering these in the sort of pre-pandemic and now the pandemic phase, it's like it brings a whole new emphasis. And if I could quickly jump to, like, segue to Paulina's question about how you know, how has the situation changed now in terms of feminism? Well, again, I mean, there's been an explosion of reckoning and rethinking, not just about feminism, but diversity, race issues, social justice. So it's almost like feminism is just one element of that, of this whole intersectional moment, which we're all struggling and doing what we can to respond to. And again, the pressures are enormous there. But going back to what Eileen said, you know, women, we need to think about how we as women scholars actually make the case for how we bring our own perspectives, our experiences to bear on this. I happen to be in a department that is dominated by women. And so therefore, you know, we kind of almost naturally are sympathetic and supportive and aggressive on these issues. So it would be interesting to hear from others about whether this momentum, this moment, you know, perhaps that could be a topic for a future webinar, like how are we responding? How should we respond as women scholars to this historic intersectional moment of reckoning? Thank you.
Thank you, Rosalind. You started answering the question by Paulina. She was asking what has changed in the feminist movement in religious studies from where you started, especially looking at queer studies. I wonder maybe Catherine or Eileen would like to answer the question.
Yes, certainly. And this is an area in which I had to expand my education and update and broaden the treatment in my manuscript that's now being published as Theory of Women and Religions. And so I hope the readers will find that I include sufficient treatment drawn from LGBTQ studies. I will say that Melissa Wilcox, reading Melissa Wilcox has been very important for me, but there are, of course, other scholars as well. And I also find that, you know, many of my students are queer. And so when I'm teaching women in religions or even women in Christianity, my students have a lot to say. So definitely, you know, the focus has broadened and it's continuing to grow to be inclusive of women around the world. Okay, so.
Thank you, Catherine. Eileen, you wanted to add something?
I've never specialized in this, but it is part of it. I mean, a lot of the religions I study think of any kind of sex outside marriage is wrong, or any kind of sex at all is wrong, or that one ought to have sex with everyone, including one's own sex. So I guess it is part of what I'm studying. But there has been an enormous change. I mean, I remember when I first started working, to be gay was against the law, and I remember people going to prison in this country because of it. And you know, it isn't something that, like Kathy, who's looked at it as a central focus.
Another question by Pauline is, why do you think it is important to be feminist as a scientist of religious studies?
What does Pauline would like to answer?
Yeah. So I don't know if Pauline is with us. Would she like to explain what does she mean by feminist? Or maybe we continue with Catherine, would you like to?
Yes. I mean, that is the next question, is how do you define feminism or being a feminist? And this is a question I thought about when I first started teaching courses on women in religions, because of course I was trained to discuss religions and teach about religions without inserting my own point of view, okay? However, you know, being a feminist is taking a position, a point of view. I'm fortunate I teach in a Jesuit university. There's a lot of emphasis on social justice in Jesuit universities. So it's, you know, being a feminist is you know, the status of women, girls and women in society is a social justice issue. It's a human rights issue. So I don't apologize for being a feminist. And then at the beginning of the course and at the beginning of my book, I provide a definition of feminism. You know, a lot of students will come in and say, well, I'm not a feminist. I think everybody should be equal, but I'm not a feminist, right? Because the opponents of feminism have promoted such a stereotype. And I think it all goes back, at least in the US, it goes back to Rush Limbaugh and his radio talk show on which he would rail about, quote, feminazis, okay? And that term has stuck. But at any rate, there's a negative stereotype. So when you oppose somebody, you create a negative stereotype about them. So I just defined feminism as the point of view that women are fully human and have the same range of talents and capacities as men, and therefore should have the opportunity to develop their talents and capacities as they choose. And then, of course, the same thing is true of men, okay? So men are fully human and have the same range of talents and capacities as women, and should have the opportunity to develop their talents and capacities as they choose. So once, you know, when I present how I define feminism, and then I also present them with other definitions of feminism, the students usually go, oh yeah, okay, I guess I'm a feminist, or something along those lines.
Well, Paulina actually typed that she would like to hear your definition of feminism, and then basing on that to reflect whether it's really important to be a feminist in the religious studies. Maybe Rosalind, would you like to join this discussion on feminism and being feminist in religious studies? How important is that?
Well, I think I'll continue the point I was making before, that that we're in another phase now, and as was mentioned, I mean, we're in an age of human rights, of more inclusion, recognition of diversity, the not just the political, but the academic importance of having diverse perspective, diverse voices. So for me, it's about non-discrimination, right, which is at the heart of the human rights idea. So feminism is one part of that. I mean, again, this moment where we're being challenged to not just operate in silos, or such as about, so you do feminism or somebody does racism. I mean, whether we like it or not, we're now having to address these as part of you know, the intersectional links between these forms of discrimination or marginalization or non-inclusion, and to join forces in order to achieve more equitable professions and academic spaces, let alone the wider world. So I mean, I'm really excited about and interested in about how the connectivity, the synergy now between these isms, if you like. I mean, I probably, by working in Africa, perhaps racism and ethnic discrimination have actually been very important to me in terms of my scholarship, but also operating as a white woman in the field, or even in departments, you know, dominated when I was teaching in Nigeria. I mean, I got the experience of being a white woman, you know, minority, and it certainly wasn't privileged either. I mean, they treated me like the lowly instructor and lecturer that I was, So again, you know, our experiences and the historical moments, I think, are important to think about here. So so thank you for these important questions.
Now our time is almost up. We are closing, almost closing this webinar. Maybe you would like to say some few words for all the participants before we finish, and invite all the participants to the future webinars. There are a few more questions left, but I hope that we will be approaching them in the future webinars. So for now, I would like to express my gratitude to our presenters and their insights, and just last words before we say goodbye. Eileen.
Well, good luck to all of you. Do what you want, enjoy it, be honest, make the world a better place.
Thank you. Catherine?
Well, yes, Eileen says it so well, so I can't top that. But it's a very rewarding area of research, you know, studying about people and religious traditions, and then also studying about women in religions, and which is really the study of women and men in religions, and the social construction of gender. And so when you're engaged in these studies, you're not learning about other people, you're learning about yourself, you know, who you are, and the social forces and the religious forces that, you know, went into this, your own social construction and your own life trajectory. So it's definitely rewarding. I know the job prospects right now are, you know, even worse than they were when I got started. And when I got started, we were all told that the job market was very tight. Well, the job market, and I feel very fortunate, you know, because I eventually was put on tenure track and it all worked out. But there are fewer and fewer positions right now that are tenure track. So, but if it's something that you are committed to studying, I think you should go ahead and do it.
Thank you, Catherine. Rosalind.
Yes, certainly there are great challenges to us as women scholars focusing on religion, different parts of the world, and in terms of the field in general, the challenges to the humanities and the social sciences. But we also inhabit, I think, a very creative moment where we can be proactive and strategic, particularly in terms of how we are connecting and communicating now, and then all the outlets that now are available to us to connect and to share and advocate. So I urge you, particularly younger scholars, to take advantage of the fact that you're more familiar with the diversity of media outlets, of forms of networking and communicating, because, and I think of some women who did not succeed for various reasons in obtaining permanent positions, but they have remained active and influential through blogs and publications and short articles and keeping up the scholarship. So there's all, I urge you to improvise, if you like. I mean, there's nothing wrong with improvisation. There are theories of improvisation. I improvised a lot, but I see that if I were starting out several decades later, I think one has to be much more adept and skilled at finding one's way and sharing one's voice and one connecting. So in that regard, let's not forget that the Women Scholars Network was initially set up to be a mentoring network and to connect colleagues who wanted to collaborate on research areas, but also a safe space where, if you don't have mentors that you trust or that are suitable, reach out to us. This is something we could do now with these sorts of forms of communication at our disposal. So in other words, we can be creative with mentoring and supporting one another in this in the 21st century. Thank you very much. Good luck to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rosalind. Thank you all three for sharing with us your reflections on your academic journeys, for recommendations for the future scholars of religion. And I would like to also say thank you to all the participants and to remind you that this was the second IAHR Women Scholars Network webinar. And in the near future, on the 20th of November, we plan to hold the third webinar. So please mark your calendars on the 20th of November. And please follow our information on Facebook. And stay safe and healthy, and hopefully see you in the very near future. Goodbye.
Okay. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.